Hello, Melonya. How are you
I
today?
am awesome. How about yourself? Did I
I
just say
am.
awesome?
You did. You
That was,
did. You
you
said
know,
awesome.
the sun just came out, and that must have made me say the word awesome.
Well, if you feel it, you got
But
to
I,
go
I
with it.
don't. But apparently, see what a little sunshine will do? It'll change everything. That is so funny.
Sunset. I can't speak today. Sunshine can do the world some magic. I think maybe there are some politicians who need some sunshine or something, because yikes.
Yeah. Mm, yeah.
Oh,
So, welcome to MT Fridays, folks. If you're joining us, come on and join us. And if you're watching us later, I am Melonya Johnson, and you are
Tahitia Timmons, and we are filling the brain drain. I jumped right in there.
one unscripted conversation at a time. Yes, we are the hosts of MT Fridays. Every Friday, we get together and we just talk about stuff, And the thing is, typically we don't know what the other person's bringing to the table. But we
Yes.
we did have a little bit of a powwow today, just checking in with each other, and so our conversation might be the same conversation, even though I did have something in my back pocket, though. What are we talking about today, Tahisha?
Uh, well, I'm bringing to the table just I have this feeling of like angst, anxiety, just about the US. It's generalized. There's nothing specific. Just more, as we head towards, and you corrected me before the show, as we head more towards a totalitarian fascist nation. What does that mean for us here? um, in the US. If you're an independent minded person, I wanted to shoot the SHIT about that.
Mm. You know what? I was coming to the table. I was going to reference a article I read about happiness in the New York Times. What makes us happy, and I think that kind of falls into. Our whole conversation might be just that. And for you that might not know who we are, you can see our credentials there. We're both coaches. Tahisha's an ICF certified coach. I'm a certified coach, trainer, speaker. She is in the DEI health equity advocate space, brilliant at it, public speaker, nurse, content creator. I am a sometimes host. I am really not doing my job when it comes to the Sovereignty Sage podcast, which I love, and I got to get back to it. So that's a little bit about us. Let's just get into the conversation now, shall we?
Yes,
So, I don't know
yes.
about you, but this has been a very tough week. I was actually crying on my manager's shoulder this week. It was a bad, it was a, it start, it, let me just put it this way. In one sense, it was a tough week, very productive week, but also, I think what took me over the edge is that I was talking to my dad's wife. There was a hearing, a governmental city hearing regarding our taxes. They're going to be going up on our taxes, and I had heard something floated like 30% increase was potential, a possibility if some other things didn't go into place, and I spoke to her about it.
Property taxes.
Yeah, yeah.
That's fascinating because I'm starting to learn as I read more that the US is a country that has property taxes, and not all places have property taxes that go on forever, is what I'm starting to understand. That real estate taxes aren't necessarily part of the entire world's existence.
Just when I was feeling bad, you hit me with something that makes me go, "What?"
I could be wrong.
Well,
It could be propaganda.
let me put it this way: the taxes that they're talking about is a increase on our whole tax levy, but be impacted by, would impact our property tax. Anyway, I said this to my dad's wife, and I said, "Hey, you want to go to this hearing with me?" It was on Monday after work on 5 o'clock p.m. And she was like, "No, that's my day to rest." And I'm like, "But you're retired." She's like, "That's my day to rest."
My
And
parents are resting every day.
but here's the thing, and of course everybody has their right to do everything, and I'm not bashing her, but that really did something to me internally that really deepened a real sense of sadness and depression, in the fact that I don't know if Americans really have what it takes to fight fascism. I
Mm.
don't know that they understand that they have to be involved in local government. And here's the thing, I'm a Johnny come lately, right? There have been people who have been in the trenches doing, not that same person I was talking about has always participate in voting, being one of the poll watching people and at the polls. So it's not to say that she doesn't have any civic duty, but I think that these times call for us to show up very differently to fight. And I'm like I said, I wish people would stop saying we are in a fascist government. We're only going into deeper levels of it where at some point it will be irreversible, right? And I don't know if people um, feel I don't know if they understand what it is that they need to do, for this time in our history.
It's also scary, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't know what you need to do and you don't know how to fight fascism in a way that is protective for yourself, as black and brown people, like it's even scarier to fight fascism in a let's just call it what it is, a country that leads from a different perspective. So, what does it look like to fight against a fascist nation when you are not necessarily the idealized race in this country, right? So, what does it look like for you and I to fight against fascism? Do we get in more trouble, especially in a country that all of a sudden is legalizing deporting its own citizens? You can't deport people to this is where we're from. Like, where are you sending us? Oh, a gulag, isn't that what they call them in Russia? Where are we going? Like, this is our country. So, I mean, I'll be honest, the Phillies stadium used to have a jail. That could be where they're sending the US citizens. That was I've heard that's awful. The Philly that's gone, by the way. But like, where would we go? I'm just curious. Where would US citizens go if they were deported from their own country, other than to be housed for profit at some other country? This is where we belong. So, how do we fight a country that just voted away its own citizens? I don't understand how that happened. Um, I don't understand that at all, actually.
I saw someone interviewed a Trump supporter, and it was one of the most truthful Trump supporters that I've seen interviewed. She said, "Well, we knew what we were voting for. We knew that we were voting for someone who would break the law and who would destroy the Constitution, and that's what we wanted." So, in other words, the things that were most important to them is, and what I find very, very interesting about this time is that the amount of talk that is not happening in, um, like everybody's kind of going on as if everything is okay and like it's just another day. I mean, the other day I played pickleball. I play pickleball every week, right? I'm like, should fascism stop my pickleball playing? You know what I mean? Um, but it's one of the few things that really brings me joy. You
But the
know,
truth but that's the truth of life, right? Life goes on. In the most horrific of situations, life continues to go on. And it's shocking in some ways how life continues forward for us, for other people, um, and that is probably the most disconcerting thing about these big shifts in the world that happen, is that in the US, we can be fine, and in another country, it can be burning, right? And life is just carrying it on, and people are going about their lives. And but it does feel like we are at a precipice. I will say this, that maybe we should be looking around and going, is there something else I could be doing? And then the question is, you start to categorize it in your head like, well, haven't I fought enough? Because we heard a lot about, and I don't know if you remember this, but some of the protests that were happening, demonstrations that were happening, people were saying there were not as many brown and black bodies showing up to those protests, and that the majority of the protests that were happening recently in the past 2 weeks were mostly being populated by white Americans here. And some of that had to do with the fact that when brown and black bodies go to protests, oftentimes we get beaten at those protests and we're treated differently. And those protests that happened were, for the most part, I believe, peaceful, right? Like you didn't see a bunch of white bodies being beaten, you didn't see any of that going on. So, there is the question of like, when do we step in physically? Because there is a different response that happens to brown and black bodies when they show up to the fight.
well, interesting enough, I have 2 points to make. One, white folks might look around and say, why aren't black people protesting? Really, you should be thanking us because our absence in that particular form of resistance keeps you safe. Because when
Mm,
we enter
excellent point.
it is when we enter the arena, that changes everything. And people were talking about, oh, martial law will if we step into that arena in terms of public protest, you can be guaranteed it will be only within seconds, even though we might be peaceful, that martial law will be enacted. That's one thing. So when you don't see us there, don't think it's not because we're not in solidarity with you. It is because we need to protect the peace of this nation. Okay, that's one thing. It was very interesting. We saw a lot of volatile uh, town hall meetings, right? But it was only at Marjorie Taylor Greene's town hall where two people, one being an African American, I think he was the first one to be tased,
Mm.
right? There was not a whole lot of coverage of that. But again, we step into a public forum, we start to voice our opinion. I haven't seen the whole video, so I don't know if he was really, cantankerous. One of the things that he did say while they were carting him off right before they tased him was that he attacked me, talking about the police officer first. He became physical with me first, right? But again, black person protesting in their way, freedom of speech, ends up being tased. Again, that was not covered really by the media. So we know. I think that I'm watching. I find it really very interestingly. And when I use the word interesting, let's use the word horrendous, substitute horrendous, that no strong leadership has really stood up. Now we've got AOC and Bernie doing their tour, and that's great. But what is going to change the trajectory of all of this is real civil disobedience, meaning work strikes. So economically, we're going into the toilet, right? But the last death nail would be for there to be periodic you know, boom, let's bring everything to a halt. Right now, you got the business community really starting to advocate for what's right. Now you've got the attention the Senate and the House of Representatives and your local folks. We need to organize that power, as well as economic. Right. Well, soon we won't be able to buy anything because there's not a whole hell of a lot coming into our ports. But there are other things. Now, the May Day, I think there were some demonstrations on May Day, which was on a Thursday. See, they hold these demonstrations on a Saturday. That doesn't really disrupt much. Try having a mass demonstration on a Monday where
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 million people don't come to work.
But then again, that's the fear, right? The fear in America that you can just be, tossed away because most Americans work in jobs that are at will jobs. If you look at your contracts, if you
They can't
not
fire all of
necessarily
us.
contracts, they can't fire everyone, but the fear of being fired is so ingrained in our hearts that I think it keeps us uh, chained to these work positions that perhaps we don't need to be chained to.
Well,
Um,
you got
and yes,
many people.
protest is going to take more than just
Yeah.
happening on a Saturday.
And so here's the thing. And again, this is one of the things I advocate for. Choosing maybe this year not to go on a vacation, but saving your PTO for strikes, right? You
Excellent
know,
point.
just thinking ahead, because here's the other thing too. The other side has already said that the folks that engineered Project 2025, they said, you know what, you can either come along peacefully or there'll be bloodshed. So they're not playing. And so there is no safe way for us to carry out this resistance. There has never been safe for people who are on the side of resistance in any place, any time in history. It's never been safe. So for us to look for safety, and I don't say that very lightly because there is a man in El Salvadorian a, a, a horrendous prison who is not a gang member. He is not guilty of anything. He is a legal resident of the United States. Our government knows it and still insists on keeping him there. The man,
Because he has tattoos.
and not anything. There was their interview of Trump the other day, and it was very interesting and disappointing to see. He was talking about there's some photo uh, of the gentleman's knuckles. He has tattoos on his knuckles, and he goes, he has whatever that gang is, MS-13 on his knuckles. And the person that was interviewing him said, that's not real. He goes, no, well, I can show you the picture. This is Trump. He goes, it's Photoshop. And there's also a picture of the same man's hand in El Salvador, and he doesn't have MS-13 on his knuckles. He said that was Photoshop. You could see the anger rising up in Trump because he was galled that somebody challenged him. And the way that the reporter was challenging him, you could tell he was uncomfortable. Well, we can agree to disagree. And Trump was like, no, that's not right. Why are you doing this? I gave you this interview when you're not even top rate and this, and he started berating him. And I said to myself, see, that's the difference between me and somebody else, because I wouldn't have backed down. I would have said, no, that's Photoshop. And then I would have held up a picture of him that has been Photoshopped and said, see how that's done? That's not real. We all know that you don't have a six pack, right? But yet and still this meme of you does, right? This was Photoshop. And I can show you a picture of the man's hands where he is being held in jail, and they got a picture of his hand just an impromptu picture, no tattoos, same hand, no tattoos, right? But he was really nervous about, telling the truth. And so, there has to come a time. And see, I think because there very well may be some real critical shortages of products that we need. I think when people on the right hand side of our democracy feel that pain, right? UPS just is going to lay off or has laid off 20,000 folks. These ports and whatnot have everything is intricate, right? So you've got truck,
Everything is
right?
interrelated.
Interrelated, right? That's the word, interrelated.
Wait till your grandparent or your sibling or someone you love doesn't get the medical treatment they need because the supplies aren't there and they die. And that will not be the physician's or the nurse's fault. That will be the supply chain fault. We think that everything is independent here in the US, but we are supplied through supply chains. Everything is dependent on each other. And what will you do when we start to short ourselves, not just on things you want, like nail polish or whatever things you can do without, but critical, like Melania saying, critical things we need to survive. This isn't just going to be toilet paper, which is important, right? But you could do without toilet paper. This is going to be the emergency things that you're going to need to thrive and survive. And if you think that when we had COVID, that was bad, this will probably be worse. I can imagine that this will be worse because you're talking about people who have lost their jobs too.
And when you stop and think about it too, you add in the fact that not only will there be critical supply issues, right? Those things that you are able to get are going to cost you two, three, four times more than they did prior to these tariffs. I think that I understand white Americans in a different way than I have ever in my history of being in this country. They I don't want to cast a wide swath and put everybody in the same basket, but the amount of fear and cowardice is crazy. And now I realize why, since slavery, there has been, they have been so ruthless in trying to contain Black people. But I think since slavery, they've always feared that we were going to come and get them, right? And so I'm being honest. I'm being honest, right?
Which
It-
that's a
it-
lot of work.
yeah,
I'm being
and you
honest.
know what? And here's the thing: we're not that kind of people. Our interest is not in trying to seek revenge on what you continue to do to us and have done to our ancestors, believe it or not. Our goal is to, which you will hear
Just
among,
want to live.
yeah, survive. That's the word that you often hear in this community. We just want to survive, right? We just survive. We just want to live and let live, do your thing, do whatever you want to do. But that isn't, and that you cannot convince me among some of these, you know, eh, and it's not just poorly educated, MAGA supporter. There's people in there that have degrees. But what is really central, there's two things happening. What is really central is that hatred fueled the voting for this, right? On one part of that party, and the other part was greed. And those in power know that they can empty the till, they can pick your pockets, right? While you're distracted hating someone, they are making billions, and Russia knows that as well. So they have been seeding and fueling a divide that has been in this country ever since Europeans landed in this country.
It's fascinating because when you think about the idea of capitalism, there's always someone winning, right? But like, if you were content with what you had, right? If you were content, then you wouldn't have this idea of a spread, right? If I'm happy with what I have and I'm not seeking to like get more and more and more, because there's only so much you can have, like, you would be content. Yet there's this idea that if I'm not content with something, then Melania's probably not content too. She would do the same thing that I would do. And she would take over if she wanted what I had. But we forget, or at least some people forget, that not everybody is going to think the same way that you do. And I find it interesting that often when you look at racism and supremacy, it's about the idea that the other person is thinking exactly like you, that they want to spread out, that they want to stretch, they want to take everything that you have. And that is not necessarily the truth. That is a falsehood. Just like the tattoos on his fingers weren't real, like there's this idea that if I think like this, somebody else thinks like that. And that's not true. And I think we have to start thinking about people as individuals that don't necessarily want to spread all over the place, that don't have these wild aims for taking over the world. Not everybody wants to be my kids used to watch this movie called Megalomaniac. Not everybody wants to rule the world. And for those who don't want to rule the world, what does that look like? And I personally don't want to rule the world, to be honest. I don't want to have all the toys. I don't want to have all the cookies. But I do want to have enough to survive, enough to live and be happy and thrive. And so, if that's my mentality, where do I sit in this world where there's this assumption that everybody is greedy, that everybody would stab somebody in the back to get whatever they have? And I do think as human beings, we should be aiming for the not that sort of ideal and the more of the like, well, what do you need? And because there's only so many shirts you can wear, right? There's only so much makeup you can wear. There's only so many physical goods that you can have. So why is that always the goal? More, more, more. Like, I really think we have to start thinking about how do we get to grow this idea of you don't need more. You just need to be satisfied with what you have. And then maybe people wouldn't look around and say, "Oh, that guy is going to take what I have. That guy wants what I." No one wants what you. I don't.
Well,
I'm just. I think there's something very flawed in our culture that
well,
grows that attitude.
well, you said in capitalism, somebody wins, which then means that somebody loses,
Yeah.
right? And and the thing is that capitalism, I always talk about the virus of greed and the virus of power, right? It's the two sides to the same coin. Capitalism is built on greed and power. But here's the thing: if we are all not working, what does that do to capitalism, right? Because then we can no
Well,
longer,
we'll find out soon.
right? But here's the interesting thing too. I wonder if this time in history, a couple of things have come to my mind. You know, when you have everything, and never, it's not like I lived high on the hog or ever did. I had two working, parents. I didn't, growing up, I didn't want for anything, right? And up until now, I always voted. I always followed politics, but I didn't feel the need to be involved in government and involved a participant to the extent that I am now as a government by the people, of the people, for the people. But it also made me think about, and when you said nobody's going to come and save us, it also made me think about the struggle that has been on the continent of Africa for so many years, right? The apartheid and the cruelty and the colonization of that continent and the oppression of the people that lived on that continent, that I never felt an association to. I never felt like I should be using some of my life force and some of my efforts to help, because I was living in a free country, so to speak, as free as you could be, and a Black person in America, but never looked across to see about other people's subjugation um, and their pain and the struggles that they went through. And I follow a couple of Africans who report on what's going on in the United States. And they talk about unity between all the Black people in this world, right? And I'm like, I wasn't aware enough, because when you have some level of comfort in life, you you don't strive for anything. I mean, you don't. We didn't feel, as a country that had 200 and some odd years under our belt in terms of democracy, that that was something that we'd ever actually have to fight for, outside of saying the Pledge of Allegiance and
But you bring up an interesting point. Many of the time, most of the time, we're so focused on ourselves and our country and what's happening to us in the moment that we're not thinking as global citizens. This would not be a problem if we were all global citizens, if we were all feeling like this earth, this planet, all of it is important to human survival. And that's the real truth, because we can't survive if the planet goes kerplunk, right? But we're so focused on our little plots of land and our countries that we don't think about the interdependentness of our world as it functions. We're no longer just countries doing our own thing. The tariffs on China, right? That's going to impact us. How China, like, we're a global world now. You can't just do something and not expect to have global impact. So, will the United States go into a sharp economic decline? Many of the analysts are predicting that this summer is going to be a rough one, because by then the tariffs, I believe, will fully have come into effect, because whatever stockpiles manufacturers might have, or retailers might have, should be gone or will be gone or at low end by the time midsummer reaches. So, what does that look like for the summer for the US? What does it look like to not be able to get all of the disposable crap that we really didn't need, anyways, right? Like, I don't know how many times I have bought some type of beach stuff every year. Every year, I think I buy some kind of, like, something to go to the beach. We go to the beach, like, twice. Like, what does it look like not to live in this privileged bubble that is the US? Like, what is that gonna look like for US citizens? Is that going to be enough to drive people to take action? And then what does that action look like? Because I honestly don't know, what does it look like after you have officially elected people in office who are not quite doing what you think they should be doing. We do have midterm elections coming up, right? How many people are going to vote uh, in a way that would have been different?
our elections protected.
Yeah, well, and can we do anything with these elections if we were to shift? Um, and what is it gonna look like for we're not even done with a year, right? It's not even a full year.
It's the first 100 days.
It's just the first 100 days. Yeah. So what is it gonna look like? What is 4 years gonna look like? Because I think we also forget that COVID hit the last time that this particular elected Trump, the last time Trump was in office, COVID hit. I think what, like 100 days in? It was about 100 days in. So will we get another virus to save us? Maybe the virus saved us. Who knows at this point?
Oh,
Um,
are you kidding? Really?
no,
No,
I'm
don't
not
even
saying.
throw that out into the universe, because then we got the ridiculous RFK, and who's neither a doctor or a scientist.
Well, he's not. It is interesting the cuts that are going on, since you mentioned him, the cuts that are going on there when it comes to healthcare, funding, research, the things that they're research, the things that they're not. It's an interesting administration.
Horrendous.
Or horrendous. Interesting has become just like, I think that's people's catch-all word
Yeah,
for when things
that's
are
why I'm
awful,
substituting
horrendous,
horrendous for
horrendous.
interesting. Yeah.
Yes. So I mean, what do we do? Is this the time to move if you can move?
Now,
I'm
interesting,
curious if
interesting.
anyone's listening, who's moving? Who's
But
making
here's the
plans to
thing.
immigrate?
Here's the problem. Other countries are now changing their immigration. They're changing it where we used to be able to immigrate to, because I've been following that trend for a few years now, right? People have, have become expats and they go other places. Well, the requirement in some of those places are now are changing in response to what is going on. So it's not going to be as easy as it used to be to go and relocate to another country. They're not making it easy for us, right? And also, um, they have more stricter financial requirements. And it wasn't, not to say that countries didn't have these kinds of requirements before, but now they've either increased them or they've enacted some of these things. So really, the window is
Well,
closing in terms
yeah.
of even being able to escape.
They're afraid of an influx
Right.
of, just like we
Refugees,
yes, of refugees
American
running for the border.
refugees.
If you've ever seen that, what was that movie where she had the hat? I didn't really watch it. Um, uh,
Oh, hi, Hannah. Yeah, it's well, how what if you're talking about RFK, how we got,
which one?
yeah, which one? Which one? But in terms of RFK, he, the entrance into um, this administration is how well you lick a boot. I mean, stop to think about it. His vice president at one point called him a Hitler or a Nazi. He was a never Trumper. He is the second in command. The two powers, the two sides of that one coin, power and greed. The virus of greed, the virus of power can make someone go against what is deeply embedded inside of them in terms of their moral standing in order to gain more money and power. When you stop to think about the richest humans on this earth, when you stop to think about Elon Musk's position, he has all the money, more money than anybody in the history of the planet, more money than anybody currently on the planet. And he was cutting resources that help fuel cancer research, help feed kids, help people in other parts of the world because we are interconnected, right? And cut off resources to them, which in turn, food and medicine, which in turn backfired against the American farmers who didn't really connect the dot that some of the foods that they grow help to fund and provide resources for the USAID, right? And so now that we're not longer doing that, the food that the money that they would have gotten from the sales of those produce no longer exists, right? But when you stop to think about the cruelty and the irony of one of the richest people on the planet taking away from the most vulnerable on the planet, old people, messing with people's Social Security, messing with people's Medicare and Medicaid, messing with um, SNAP, right? Things that feed people, right? When you think about the insanity, how much money does one human being need? The virus agreed, like any other virus, will keep consuming until it kills the host. Well, if we are a capitalist country fueled by the virus of greed, it won't stop until we are decimated, until it kills the host. And that's the direction that we're going, as this is not hyperbole. I mean, that is the direction that we are going in. And so when you stop to think about, this is not something that we can be safe in, because you're never going to be, if you're trying to be safe, there is no safety in a dictatorship, in a fascist country. That you're never going to have safety. So so
So
would
we
you?
get out.
Mhm.
So we should get out.
No, would you no? What you need to, what needs to happen is that there are there's a void in real leadership, right? There's a void in leadership, and there's a void in, I think there are a lot of people out there, and here's the thing. This is what I do. I call my senators. I write my senators. I let my voice be heard, right? And I tell them exactly what I think and exactly what I want and what I expect of them. Don't know if they get that message, but I do. I call them, I go onto their websites, and I write them. I participate in economic boycotts. Ask Target. Target will bring my grandmother from the dead if they think that now, right now, Target was not interested in DEI or Black people's money until we said, nope, you're not going to get our money. And then they're calling, the president of Target is calling Al Sharpton and Reverend whatever Bryant to come to the table. And I'm like, look, Reverend Al and Reverend Bryant, they don't speak for me. I started boycotting them before they called any kind of boycotts. And you asked long ago, well, what's the end result? When I posted the other day, the end result is when the last person is out of Target, turn off the lights. I'm done. You cannot show me who you are and then expect me to turn the other cheek, because we've been turning the other cheek for the last 400 years. So the American people have to decide, give me death or give me liberty? Is that something? Is that a saying? People need to understand that your liberty absolutely comes at a cost. It comes at a real cost. And we have been fortunate, no, not we, Black people have been fighting for their liberty ever since they've been on this planet, right? Ever since they've been in this country, and ever since they've been colonized in other countries. They've been fighting for their liberty. Now, white folks in this country have to fight for their liberty. And it is not something that you sit around and you look for somebody else to do. You look to see what you can do. Another part of resistance is making certain that you have something for yourself. Like I encourage people, start a garden. There may be food shortages. You're going to have to try to outlive this. You have to get with people, organizations that are mobilizing. I mean, but here's the thing. If you have done absolutely nothing from January 20th until now, you are complicit. Don't look around and say, well, I
Not
don't
just
know
a
what to do.
garden, also a rain, like, start collecting your water too.
Yeah. I mean, but really, I mean, if you cannot.
This sounds like Survivor end
Well,
times, but it is.
welcome. And here's the problem. Here's the sad part is that we don't have to be here, but yet this is where we are. We do not have to be here, but this is who we are. And until those folks who voted for him start to put pressure on when the senators and the representatives start to feel the mob more than they fear him, that's when things are going to change.
Do you think they care though? Because, I've been
They
thinking about
will when
it.
they don't have food.
Well, no, I mean the mob, because I've been thinking about it. And in countries that have gone towards fascism, right? Like there people begin to realize, hey, this probably wasn't the greatest thing. And by the time they wake up, it's too late because the government controls the military, right? So what will happen when people finally wake up, but they wake up too late and the military and martial law is already declared. We already see certain groups out rounding up people. They're called ICE, right? Isn't that what they're called? But what about the next phase of that? When the military comes in, I saw something on what is it? Instagram. I saw something on Instagram where a teacher, she wasn't crossing a border, she was stopped by, I think, a checkpoint on a highway that she was driving on. And they asked for her identification. And she said, I don't need to show you anything. I'm in my state. I'm not crossing a state. And they said, you need to show us you're a citizen. And she said, I'm not going to show it to you. And they pulled her aside, and from what went on in that video, she kept saying, "I'm a citizen. I don't need to prove that I'm a citizen in my state." But what are we gonna do when we start to see more of these checkpoints, more of these armed guards, when our police become involved? What happens then when local police become part of militias?
And
Like,
that's
what
why it's important to be involved on the local level as well. As part of that resistance is to be involved what's going on in your local level and your state level, because that might be the thing that holds this, at bay for a while. But I think the good news is that the atrocities are happening so quickly that people are going to feel the pain faster. If this was carried out over 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, it would be like that analogy we've been hearing a lot about. You put the frog in cold water and you turn up the heat a little bit, and the frog doesn't realize that it's being
mm,
boiled to death, right? Well, in no time, we understand that we're being boiled to death. And when those tariffs kick in, plus a shortage of supplies and food and all of the things that we need to survive kicks in, then boom, it's going to make sense to folks that that I casted a vote, even though I casted a vote for my hate, or I casted a vote for my greed. Life has a way of boomeranging around, and what you put out in the world, karma comes back to you, right? And so I think that the fact that the atrocities are happening, and I was talking to someone the other day, yesterday at work, and she was describing how one of her relatives lost their job because of this. When people start to see truckers, right, that if you don't have anything to haul, then you don't have work, right? That's another family. These are another communities that are impacted. Farmers, right? When farmers don't have the money to get, I was watching somebody the other day who is a gardener. He sells his food, but talked about how much seeds are costing, right? Which should have been a $4,000 purchase, after tariffs became over $7,000. Also, oh, what you say, Hannah? Also, I've been thinking about moving and how that feels like it could be running away, getting out where a difference could be made. But that's coming from me as a white, able-bodied woman. So sure. No, you're not alone, Hannah, in
you
terms of,
are
I think,
moving every day.
yeah, people are moving, and they have been for years. And see, here's the problem. And you know what? Here's the thing. I say to anybody that can, save yourself, right? Because and as a person of color, and I've said this to and probably tearfully to you, who wants to spend their entire life fighting, right? I
Yes.
don't want to spend my last years fighting fascism. But look, that's where we are. And I can't be quiet.
Hannah, it's an interesting statement you make because my mother, who is in her 70s, I don't know how old she is. I'm sure she knows how old she is. But for the first time in my mother's life, she said to me, "Canada is looking good." My mother has never said that. My mother has been a fighter, a protester, a fighter in the 70s, like petite little white Jewish woman who just is very mouthy. And she said, I don't think I can do this more. I see bad things. And I heard that and I thought, oh my goodness, like this is bad. If my little mother who and I said to her, "Mom, come on, how much longer do you have?" No. Like, just stick it out. Just stick it out with us. And she was like, "Look, Canada's looking very good." Like, can't like, she even said she would go to, like, Europe, which she's never said that before. So it must be bad. In my heart, I think, "Whoa, that's bad."
It,
Like,
well,
if
well,
my
this
mother is saying that, because she's always the first person who's like, "Nope, we go in, we take down the government officials, people get elected, that's how you change. Spook is sat by the door, you make change from within." And, for her to say that was surprising. And then talked to my brother who, you know, like the whole family at this point is sort of like, maybe we should leave. Maybe you also don't want to be looking back and saying, wow, I could have gotten out when I could have gotten out. Like,
here's the thing,
you
and
know,
Hannah,
I,
you know what? If you have an opportunity to go to Brazil, go. You know what? But here's the thing: when I stop to think about the world, because I've been thinking about or exploring what it looks like to relocate. Folks do it all the time. There's groups out there that can help you to make those moves and to build community. While you're deciding to go. Here's the challenge. When you start to look, the world is very unsettled these days. We're going through our own thing, which is really horrendous, right? But you look at different parts of the world. Well, look at El Salvador, right? He is a self-proclaimed Bukele is a what does he call himself? A cool, a good dictator, as if there's any such thing. If you have an opportunity to go, you're young. It is. Here's the thing: I would feel differently about this fight if I knew that I had the whole rest of the country fighting with us, right? But we've got half of the country who is being fed propaganda that works against their own, and let's just get it clear. Bezos almost did something that was actually courageous. He's like, okay, we're going to have to go up on our prices because of these tariffs. We want to show people how much they're paying in tariffs.
you pulled
And
that back fast.
he got the clap back fast. And then he was like, okay, no. But see, those are the things that keep the American people in the dark. I know that if I paid 89 cents for a tomato yesterday, and it's $10.50 next week, I know where it comes from, because I stay on top of things and I have a different source of information, right? But when you've got half of the country who is, one, filled with hatred that blinds them, and undereducated, misinformed, lied to, easily manipulated, it makes me. I'm close to Canada, so I'm like a bridge drive
Canada
away.
is looking good.
You know what I'm saying? If I got to be a refugee, it's going to be in Canada. Uh, you know, um, yeah,
Or what did he call it? The 51st state?
whatever you call it, as long as it's not a part of the United
No, I
States.
mean, when he
Yes,
said he was gonna
yeah.
annex it, and yeah,
No,
I
no,
don't think
thank
that
you.
will happen.
That you know
But
what, but what I'm saying is that I think that those people and here's the other thing too. Just because you leave the country does not mean that you cannot
yes,
still mount a resistance, for this country. You can build coalitions in other countries. You can still support. You can still get your message out and your word out. You can still share information to the extent that you can share information from outside of the country when the country is being controlled, when media is being controlled. Our media has, been so fearful of reporting the truth. So there is always work to be done for your country,
Yes.
be it
You can
on the
build.
soil or be it outside of the country. The
Yes.
thing is that this is my country, and I'm going to fight for my country. I'm going to fight for the ancestors that were enslaved.
It doesn't have to be here. You can build empathy for the United States by being in another country. You can represent the United States by showing that not US citizens, not all US Americans are, racist, are uninformed, are supportive of what's happening. There are many different ways that you can fight against a dictator and a regime like this. Um, Unfortunately, I do think that I agree with you. If you can leave, leave. I look more every day at leaving. And just because you leave doesn't mean that you can't come back. We know that during times of dictatorships and warfare and different things, like people who have left countries have come back later on. If you have property here, it doesn't mean that you can't leave the property here and, like it might be the time for those who should or can get out to get out and work from the outside. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging your strengths. I feel like you and I are communicators. Might do better to leave the country and communicate and spread the message externally from the country. Myself, as a healthcare worker, I could go someplace and use those skills external to the United States. But what does it mean when the US begins to lose some of that intelligence, right? Like, some of those people who can leave often are the people who have knowledge, who have a little bit of assets. Because they can leave, they're a little bit, what does it mean to lose that part of the population? I do think about that.
Well, I can tell
um
you from a from a city uh, uh, that we talk about the brain drain. One of the traditional um, meanings of brain drain is when those folks that have you know um, who are educated and well established, they leave. That happened to Buffalo a few decades ago, right? And what happens is that you have a decay, and so if there's an exodus of some of the brightest, and here's the thing, other countries have extended a welcome to our scientists. They've extended a welcome to folks where people would come from other countries to go to school here. We're making it inhospitable for them to do this, but they're still going to go to school. They're just going to go someplace else.
mhm.
Oftentimes, those same smart people stay here and help to contribute to the society after they graduate from school, right? We're not going to have that influx. So when the people who are educated, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, I mean that there is a place for everyone, right? But when you lose your intellectual strength, then you then have an even larger population of people who can be manipulated and who will vote and work against their own good, and you have a deterioration of a country. So it makes it, like I said, it is something really to think about for those people who have the means to do so, but also understand the window was closing in terms of some of the eligibility that used to be open to us, that is no longer open to us. How many times have I seen refugee situation? And I think it's been a few years that I stopped thinking about, wonder if Americans become refugees, right? And it's something that could very well happen in this country. American refugees. And that's really a shame because this man inherited a strong economy. There's no reason why we're here today, except for the fact that a person who has filed bankruptcy 6 times, has had fraudulent businesses that have collapsed, has had multiple lawsuits, is now in charge of our country.
Yeah. Yeah. And, well, we are up at the hour,
Yeah.
so we're gonna close out for the day. The only thing I'm gonna leave us with is don't forget, if you do decide to leave, it's not a failure of not wanting to stay in this country. It is simply, as Melonya said, now might be the time to leave, and you can still continue to fight for your country external to the country. And there are many countries that seek Americans to come now, especially during a technology shift. We're also in a technology shift, which is happening. So
And
don't forget that.
if you decide to stay, you got to fight.
Yes. And if you
Until then,
stay, you're going to have to fight.
you're going to have to find some way to make your voice heard. So, with that being said, thanks, Hannah. Thanks for
Thanks,
joining
everybody,
us
for
today.
joining.
Thank you, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us with MT
We had
Fridays.
a good time and hope you did too. Join us each Friday as we fill the brain drain one unscripted conversation at a time. Like, subscribe, and share. Help us spread our reach on YouTube. Until next Friday, stay curious.